Good morning and good afternoon. Thank you for joining day 3 of our 2020 virtual user meeting, ligand-gated ion channels in drug discovery. My name is Jason Villagomez, Marketing Manager at Nanion Technologies, and will be your moderator for today's presentation. By default, all participants are muted, and upon completion of the presentation, I will open the floor up to some questions. We encourage you to submit your questions throughout the course of this talk. It is now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Omar Alijevic, Philip Morris International, presenting Pharmacological Characterization of Natural Tobacco Alkaloids in the presence of positive allosteric modulators against human 4B2 and A7 nicotinic acetylcholine receptors. I will now hand over the presentation to Omar.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Jason and Nanion, for organizing all that. Highly appreciated. As he just mentioned, I work for Philip Morris International. We are based in Neuchâtel, a small city in the French part of Switzerland, west here, in a so-called The Cube, a building, nice building in front of the lake, where nowadays hundreds of employees focus on the development of products with the potential to reduce the risk of tobacco-related diseases. And recently also a life science department has been created, and it's in this department in which I've been working for the last two years. And with the help of Nanion, I set up an electrophysiology lab together with imaging technique experiments in which we try to characterize our favorite ion channel, which of course for Philip Morris, a tobacco company, will be the acetylcholine nicotinic receptor. And here I wanted to present you a pharmacological characterization of these natural tobacco alkaloids in the presence, but also in the absence of these positive allosteric modulators against the alpha-4 and alpha-7 nicotinic receptor. So small background, if you take a commercial tobacco plant, it produces like alkaloids, which are simply nitrogen-based organic compound, at the levels of between 2 and 4% of its total dry, and the majority of these total alkaloid content is basically nicotine, 90%. And the remaining 10% almost entirely account for the structurally related alkaloids called nornicotine, anabazine, and anatobine. Also, hundreds of other alkaloids are present, but in smaller amounts or traces, let's say. And of course, nicotine activates one of the first targets in our body are the nicotinic acetylcholine receptor, expressed in the central and peripheral nervous systems. Also, I will not talk, but they are very important also for the alpha-1, the mast nicotine receptor. Here we focused on the subunits that are most abundant in the brain, so the alpha-7 and the alpha-4 subunits. They've been played significant roles in cognitive process, mood, pain, and nerve protection. And also, it's very well known their deleterious effects, of nicotine on respiratory, cardiovascular, and gastrointestinal function, and of course, the addiction problems. But yeah, in the last decades, let's say pharmacologists were motivated to discover new selective compounds for the specific subunits of the nicotinic acetylcholine receptor family in order to discriminate their deleterious effects from the therapeutic potential they have in different conditions such as Alzheimer's diseases or schizophrenia and major depressions. And concerning the tobacco alkaloids, but except one compound called metanicotine, that is quite selective for alpha-4, but the other, they do not really show any pharmacophoric elements required for a selective interaction with the nicotinic acetylcholine receptor. So here what we want to do is simply to understand a bit better what the tobacco leaves contains and how the different alkaloids, in addition to nicotine, interact with the nicotinic acetylcholine receptor. So we were interested to look for agonists, so in which we applied alkaloid alone. We were looking for PAM, so positive allosteric modulator, in which we co-applied alkaloids with acetylcholine. We were looking for SAG, so the so-called silent agonist, and in which I will talk a bit better later on for the one that are unfamiliar with those terms, in which we co-applied alkaloids with a subunit-specific PAM. And we used the patch liner to perform patch clamp recording, and the fluorescence imaging plate reader to perform imaging techniques or experiments. Just simply to show you a workflow, our common workflow when we work with the nicotinic receptor. After culturing them at 37 degrees, we transfer them for a period of time that comprised from 6 hours to 1-2 days at 30 degrees in order to increase their surface expressions, followed by the successive day, let's say, with the electrophysiological and the imaging experiments. We classify then the tobacco alkaloids in 4 distinct groups based on the chemical features, if you want, and then testing them against the human alpha-7 and alpha-4. Here is just to show you that these receptors, alpha-4 and alpha-7, are functional. This is a concentration response of acetylcholine. We can clearly see the activation, the different kinetics. And also alpha-4 is like more than 100 times more sensitive to acetylcholine compared to alpha-7. When we look for agonists, we apply by using the patch liner, the alkaloid at a specific concentrations for both alpha-4 or alpha-7, and then compare those results to the maximal induced current mediated by ACH, so-called acetylcholine. And what we realize, this is in percentage, this is the agonistic effect compared to the maximal induced current by ACH for alpha-7 and alpha-4, blue and black respectively. In general, you can see that it's pretty silent, the whole pictures. So the majority of those alkaloids do not really act against those subunits. And only few, especially from the group A, activate the nicotinic receptor, and particularly the alpha-4 subunits. Then in the attempt to look for a positive allosteric modulator, we pre-incubated the alkaloids for 2 minutes at least, and then followed by a co-application of acetylcholine. We used the EC20 concentration of acetylcholine, and then we determine, we measure the PAM effect, if you want, compare to the conditions, to the control conditions, if you want, in the absence of the alkaloids. And here I show the results of the same alkaloids. And then if it's 0, it's just simply that there is no effect. And we can clearly see that the majority of those tobacco alkaloids rather has tendency to inhibit, to decrease the nicotinic acetylcholine function. So the receptor are rather blocked by the tobacco alkaloids, and there are none that actually potentiate the acetylcholine induced current. So no PAM has been found by the screening, let's say. Yeah, at the beginning of the year, we published those results in which you can read if you want. It's an open access journal, and we clearly show that the 4 alkaloids, actually this corresponds to the 4 major alkaloids present in the tobacco leaves, and uniquely activate alpha-4 nicotinic receptor. Then we carry on those experiments. We decided to look for silent agonists. So what are silent agonists? Well, let me show you, maybe it's not the best example, but let me show you again nicotine at one specific concentration. And then this is simply the same response, but in a different scale, because I wanted to give you a sense of what happens when we co-apply the well-known agonist in the presence of a PAM. This case is an alpha-7 PAM. It's in a nanomolar concentration. You can clearly see that the response is dramatically increased, not only the current amplitude, but also the duration of the response is much longer. Of course, but a silent agonist in reality is you can have compounds, it's not the case for nicotine, but you can have other alkaloids that do not induce any response, whatsoever response when they applied alone. So you will have no activation of the nicotine receptor, but we do have an activation of the nicotine receptor when and only when complied with a PAM, if you want. So those are silent because are not acting alone. So silent for that reason, but still silent agonists because they reveal the agonistic activity when co-applied with a PAM. So we decided to look among the tobacco alkaloids if there were some silent agonists. But before, I wanted to give you a sense of a technical problems that we encountered during this particular screening for this modality, because you can see that kinetics here is relatively fast, if you want, because we used a relatively high concentration of nicotine. However, when the nicotine concentration is much slower, which are lower, sorry, the kinetics also becomes slower. I will give you now an example. Here is 1 micromole of nicotine co-applied with the same concentration of the alpha-7 PAM. And I apply that combinations, if you want, for different times. And independently of the time, I really couldn't reach a situation in which I saturated the response. And I couldn't go further because the pipetter of the patch liner has a limit capacity for the volume applications. If I wanted to, I had to decrease the speed. Then I decreased the speed, but still I couldn't saturate the response. So we were not so confident to reliably assess the potency. For that reason, we had to switch and we had to come back to our normal imaging techniques in which we don't have any limitation for the compound application and so on, even though will not be a direct method, will be just indirect methods because we will add a floor for this. But here you can see that the increasing concentration of nicotine always saturate the response in terms of the kinetics in itself. So we had to use these flipper techniques. So this is simply state for the fluorescence imaging plate reader, in which we use voltage, in which we measure the voltage changes induced by the entry of the calcium and the sodium ions through the nicotinic acetylcholine receptor, and that are detected by using the membrane potential sensitive dye. We use in a 96-well format. We could go pretty fast for that. Let's go back here just to remind you the agonistic activity of those alkaloids. And this is what happens when you co-applied the alkaloids with a positive allosteric modulator. You can clearly see that the co-application of with a PAM revealed a broad activity among all the different tobacco alkaloids and for different groups. And importantly, not only for alpha-4, but we were kind of surprised to see such a high activity also against alpha-7. So this is just to show you the same results differently. Second and fourth column that correspond to alpha-7 and alpha-4 respectively. When the alkaloids are applied, you can see that they activate rather alpha-4 rather than alpha-7. Then when you co-apply with a PAM, more and more alkaloids become active, not only against alpha-7, alpha-4, but also against alpha-7. And we assessed the potency. We were surprised to see that in the presence of the PAM, the potency were quite let's say, important, reaching like a nanomolar activity. Again, this is to give some name and some specific value. Again, the first two columns are for alpha 7, then for alpha 4, agonist or co-applied with a PAM. And we've seen that for some compounds, the potency increased up to 200-fold when you compare to the agonist mode. You see, for example, Nicotine or nicotine also as well, or other compounds such as anabazine. We also show here that some compound, such as metanicotine, that was thought to have selective properties to interact with alpha 4 alone, but we reveal some activity also against alpha 7 when a PAM is co-applied together with it. We also seen some interesting behavior of specific tobacco alkaloids, such as the anatabine. There are some selective preference for the enantiomer. The S form prefer rather the alpha 7 isoforms, whereas the R form prefer the alpha 4. And so we start from a scenario in which the four major components constituting the alkaloid contents of the tobacco leaves activate uniquely alpha 4 nicotinic acetylcholine receptor, but in the presence of the PAM, those same compound start also to solicitate, if you want, the broader alpha 7 nicotinic receptor. Plus, we also realized that 12 other alkaloids, so 10 for alpha 4, demonstrated agonistic effects only in the presence of the PAM, so therefore considered silent agonist, and only 2 against alpha 7. But still, we found some specificity only for alpha 4 or for alpha 7, which was not the case when seen and test them in agonist mode. So to show you the whole pictures of these tobacco alkaloids, I wanted to exhibit their agonistic effects with their agonist co-applied with a PAM effect. And you can clearly see that only few of those tobacco alkaloids show real agonistic effects, and then especially for the alpha 4 subunits. Whereas the majority of these tobacco alkaloids, let's say, act as a silent agonist, and not only for alpha 4, but also, to our surprise, for alpha 7. Now, on the short future, Phil Morris is interested, so we are interested, right, to extrapolate and investigate if there are some therapeutic potentials of the so-called silent agonists. So with that, I concluded my presentation, and if you have any question, please don't hesitate to ask them.
Thanks, Omar. I'm going to go ahead and now open the floor to some presentations. Again, if you have any open questions, please feel free to put into the chat. I'll go ahead and get started with a couple here. Do you have any theories as to why the low concentration of nicotine didn't elicit a robust response on the patch liner?
For what concern the problem with when co-applied with a PAM, or
alone in the 1
Well, actually, nicotine in the patch line. Well, for alpha 4, we tested internally also different nicotinic receptor, and there was robust nicotine-induced response among different subunits of the family. But for alpha 7, we know very much the kinetics is very, very fast. So the response there is, when applied alone, is so fast, 20 milliseconds or 40 milliseconds, in which you have the activation and the desensitizations occurs in very short time. And this is common to all agonists. Actually, there are only one agonist, to my knowledge, that slow down the desensitization, and mimicking, if you want, the PAM effect. So it's not so surprising for alpha 7, let's say. Then depends on the concentration. Sorry.
No, sorry. And continuing this, are you looking, what kind of studies are you doing currently at the moment? Are you still looking at these agonists, or?
At the moment for the, yeah, we try to publish those results of the silent agonist. So this second part has not been published. So we would like to write a paper about that. Then currently what we are working is the understand the other nicotinic acetylcholine subunits. So we are just currently doing the same against all the subunits. So the alpha 6 or alpha 5, we also have the alpha 1. So we try to cover, we would like to cover the whole family of the nicotinic acetylcholine receptor. We also are interested with the less studied alpha 9, difficult to study. Don't know if actually the channel gating is being proposed rather to, unless I'm wrong, is not, no ligands has been found so far to open those channels. So that's why we think they might work differently. Nevertheless, it doesn't, we're still looking for maybe potential ligands, let's say.
And then are these all working on the patch liner or with the flipper technique that you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, then for the second part, we had to confirm at least the results in the patch liner using a direct method. So even though the potency was assessed for using the flipper, so the imaging techniques, we used, again, I didn't show the data, but on the patch liner, just to confirm that those compounds were actually open, even though we couldn't reliably assess for the reason previously described the potency by using the patch liner. We used still the patch liner to confirm that such compounds were active when co-applied with the PAM, because lots of them were inactive alone. So just to avoid any artifacts of false positive from the imaging techniques and experiment, we had to confirm by using the patch liner. Yeah, sure, we did that.
I'll give another second for any other outstanding questions. In the meantime, just to kind of wrap up here, the on-demand copy will be made available immediately upon completion, as will the talks that went on today. And I will link all the contact information below for all the presenters. So if there's any questions that you come up with when you're rewatching, that's perfectly fine. Reach out to the presenters and the Nanion team individually here as well. So I'd like to thank Omar for going through the presentation. And yeah, we would like to invite you all for day 4 tomorrow with our presentation that will begin at 10 a.m. Central European time. Again, all the talks will be made available on demand. We know that it can be a little tricky with all the time zones. We have Dr. Carmine Gentile, who will be presenting 3D bioprinting of pathophysiological human heart models using vascularized cardiac spheroids as building blocks. And we have a full slate of talks, so we welcome you to join where possible.
Thanks.
And Omar.
So if no further question, thank you for giving us the opportunity, and see you tomorrow.
Thank you. Take care now.